Hi, I'm Randy Davidson. My company is Randy Davidson Designs in Tucson, Phoenix, anywhere around. Her passion and commitment to the community have set a stage for a bright future. And we know next year will even be better. So please welcome me in welcoming a passionate community leader, a nationally trademarked voice for keeping Tucson connected, and a proud advocate for local businesses. My daughter. My mom asked me not to say this, but Stacy's mom got it going on. Have you heard that song? It's the truth. Stacy's mom's got it going on. So thank you, Mom. I love you. And I appreciate each and every person here that's sharing my dream, and there'll be different people tomorrow because someone can't come today or they can go tomorrow, different speakers. And thank you to each and every speaker, each person that's sharing this dream. And I really like that TLC, Tucson Leadership Conference. I think that's going to work even better. So I hope your experience in the different breakout sessions, you're learning something and meeting different people. And I want to stress that for the next session and tomorrow, when you go into a session or even with a Q&A that's going to happen with Howard and Paul, if you have a question, we're going to have this microphone, say your name, your company, and then ask the question, because there's going to be people in this room that you want to meet. And this whole conference, the whole idea, I add all the speakers, but it's all networking, 100%. Other groups, other associations, they have other ideas, different parts. But what we do is 100% networking. Let's get together. So I would like to stop talking, and because it's not about me ever, it's always about each and every person. So if you ever have an idea or you want to meet someone through networking, I'm always happy to stop, text, call, meet with people, and help you get the most out of creating new relationships. So thank you so much, Howard Stewart. It's just been a pleasure getting to know you. And he may not remember, but when I was a teenager, and so I'm a Tucson native. I was working for the Broadway Southwest. Okay, remember that? I was on Broadway Woman. And I'm a teenager. He comes into the department that I worked in, and he purchased something for his wife back then. And I worked for about 9 years in the intimate apparel department at Broadway and Wilmot. And I just remember him because he's got such a presence. And he did then, and he looks the same. So, and when I heard Howard Stewart, I remember being 17, 18, 19, and he comes up, and I think he wanted to purchase a nightgown or something like that, nothing, you know. So I always remembered Howard Stewart, and he is the man. And I thought, when I'm putting this whole list of people together for this conference, it's a process. But who the keynote speakers are super duper, super important. So, but I want to introduce Paul Davis. He's the division manager of AGM Container Controls, and he's going to tell you, he's going to introduce Howard. So please, welcome, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor today to introduce to you Howard Stewart. Howard is a community leader. He's also been a CEO, and he is a philanthropist who's been a part of the Tucson community for a long, long time. He has been the CEO for AGM Container Controls for the past 24 years, and during that time, his leadership has been acknowledged in 2002 as the Small Business CEO of the Year, in 2018, CEO of the Year by the Tucson Chamber of Commerce. In 2022, he was recognized as the Transformational Leader of the Year by the Arizona Tech Council and the Arizona Commerce Authority. So please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Howard Stewart. We're going to do something a little different. I'm going to turn the tables on Howard. Normally, as my CEO, he asks me questions. Today, I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then we're going to invite you guys to ask some questions of him as well. So Howard, welcome to the hot seat.
Great, thank you.
Is there one additional microphone?
Yeah.
Good.
Set? Okay.
Thank you all for being here today. Paul and I have put together this presentation somewhat on the fly, but we really hope you'll enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, we bought the liquor last night, so clap anyway.
Well played, Howard. All right, so some of our guests here today may not really know that much about AGM or all the different things that it's involved with. I was wondering if you could maybe take a few minutes and share with us a quick overview of AGM Container Controls in terms of its products, the various markets it serves, and why we kind of joke internally that maybe we are the world's smallest conglomerate.
Okay. So, AGM developed out of a company called Arizona Gear Manufacturing that's long gone, but that's where the A and what the A and the G and the M initially stood for. It was founded and ran by a man named Harrison Browning, who was a very, very intelligent guy. I heard from my father that he was like first in his class back at MIT. Anyhow, what happened was up until, say, like the early 1950s, containers for the missile market had basically been made out of steel, and steel is very heavy, very bulky, and it was realized that if they had breather valves on these containers, that they could instead make these containers out of aluminum and fiberglass, and those materials are roughly about a third lighter and less dense, so less bulky. So Harrison himself developed the first breather valve in the early 1950s, and then in 1958, he walked into a manufacturing rep company over in Los Angeles, and my father was given the task of representing Arizona Gear both for sales and marketing on a national level, trying to get this product off the ground. That ultimately led to an opportunity for my father, my mother at this point had gotten into the business, so to basically take over that portion of the business in 1970. So they started with 17 employees, and today we have about 135, so it's grown over time. It's always been, fairly incremental growth, like, picking up a few employees here and there. It's always been kind of a hard challenge to grow the enterprise, but we've been very focused on it. I took over when they had about 45 employees, some almost 25 years ago. We think we're actually one of the few businesses for the defense market that actually saves the military money. We think over the years we probably have saved them billions and billions of dollars on transport costs for containers and also for warehousing them, because they've been able to do this and get a lot more on it. They give them transport vehicle or in a given warehouse. So that's sort of a short summation of how things started. As far as markets, so we serve, like I said, the container market for missiles, but then that led us to get involved with the missiles themselves. So we have something we call desiccators with desiccant inside that absorbs moisture vapor on both the optic systems for the missiles, so that the missile can see the target, the camera in the missile can see the given target. And it's also where the seeker guidance system, so that that part of the missile won't corrode. We're also on drones. So this is probably about, well, I think as of the end of last year, like 58% of the business. But then we have a couple of other major businesses, one being our wheelchair lifts. It's a commercial business, and basically we sell to public facilities like convention centers, hotels, casinos, churches, very different than our military market. And then more recently, we've gotten involved, and by the way, Paul heads up the wheelchair lift line, as well as now we're actually beginning to manufacture a wheelchair that we call Omeo. And it utilizes Segway technology. So the person in the wheelchair doesn't have to actually steer, using their hands. Their hands are free to be able to do other things. So it's been an exciting transformation. We also make a lot of tie-down straps. We make a product called Shock Master for the, primarily goes to the nuclear industry. So virtually every nuclear plant in the world, including like the Chinese, and I thus assume the Russians, but they're utilizing our shock indicator to indicate when the fuel rod has been subjected to shock during shipment, I think for repair, maintenance type things. Apparently it's not a good idea to install a faulty fuel rod into a nuclear reactor, so that's our contribution to that industry.
So tell us a little bit, Howard, how did you get involved with the business? You shared a little bit about how it was founded, but how did you get involved?
I actually started working there, every day, the summer that I was 12 years old. So I wasn't even a teen yet. And it's allowable by law. Maybe some of you know that you have your children involved. I was also very, I liked work. I liked making money. I guess I didn't really like working. Never enjoyed that too much, but I really liked making money and having my own money to spend. I remember when I was 12-year-old taking my parents out to a fine dining restaurant because I could, and that was cool. Now, at the time, I only made $1 an hour, and minimum wage was $1.40 an hour. And frankly, when other employees found out that I was making $1 an hour, by and large, they thought I was pretty much overpaid. So, but fortunately, my compensation's gone up a little bit since then.
And tell us a little bit about AGM today. We are a high-mix, low-volume manufacturer. Why don't you describe that just briefly, and then a little bit about where we are from a revenue standpoint?
Sure. Yeah, we make a lot of different, like even in our core military defense market, we make lots of different versions of everything we do, whether it's a breather valve or a desiccator, humidity indicators, whatever it is. We just have a lot of different versions, and we aren't typically making very many of each. So I would say probably the average order for a given component is less than 100. I'm not sure the exact numbers, so we're not doing big runs of things. It's very hand intensive, although we have been, just in recent years, been able to automate more and more things, and that certainly is an effort that we continue to push in, because we want to become more efficient, and we do have competitors out there. So low volume, high mix, lots of different products. Not so much even in the wheelchair lift market, my understanding is about 50% there's some sort of customization going on that product.
We're always customizing
Yeah.
colors, etchings, configurations, whatever they need.
And then there's three major models for that particular market. The Omeo is kind of exciting. It's still not going to be, you know, high numbers, at least anytime soon. But it is something that's kind of get sort of excited about in terms of basically people need, you know, when getting into wheelchairs, they pretty much need the same thing.
So AGM's approximately 40 million in revenue now, Howard, but it wasn't always that way,
No.
right?
No.
And so we've got a couple photos of the founders. I don't know if you want to speak to this with your parents or.
Yeah, so that's my father, of course, on the left, my mother on the right. And
Yeah, they ran it for about 30 years. My father was CEO for the first 20, my mother for the next 10. And it was actually during the 90s, and through no fault of either of my parents, but especially not of my mother, but we ran into some real headwinds running the company. There was, so yeah, probably not many of you in this room will remember this, but there was a gigantic downturn in the military, sort of at the end of George H. Bush, and Bill Clinton. And basically America didn't really perceive that we had any significant enemies out there at that time. And the Middle East was not, you know, as terroristic as it's become today. You know, Russia was doing like this glasnost thing with us. China was not anywhere near as powerful as it is today. So, and our business went down right around with it. So, and things were so bleak that the Bank of America did not think we were going to make it. In fact, they put us in something called special accounts, which, if any of you have experienced this yourselves, you'll find out is not very special. It was basically, they're having to spend a lot of money, they're coming in, they're constantly doing audits and things, but, you know, so it was, and like during that time, we weren't able to pay people more, so basically, there were no wage and salary increases for about 3 years, and it was really, it was a big challenge, and it was right at this time that basically I advanced into management, you know, just had a lot of challenging things on our plate.
Well, and not only that, it was a challenging time for the company, but you've shared with me before that you also faced some challenges for coming into the role of CEO, some of it from employees, some of it from even new members of your own family. How did you handle that, and what did you learn from it?
Okay, so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of you are second generation or third generation out there, but maybe you've experienced something similar, but yeah, there were a lot of doubters in my ability, and I think I was chief among them. I doubted my own abilities is what I typically do. It was hard, and so you had people kind of like making sure that they got their investment out of the company before I took over. On the other hand, that ended up being a great opportunity for me to pick up ownership shares on the cheap relative to what they are today. Speaking of which, you can see those challenging years on the left side of the red between about 94 and 98. And basically, I didn't leave the stock prices on there because it really wouldn't mean anything to you all, but suffice it to say that in our turnaround, we have been able to grow the company in size, grow the company in terms of, value, a total of 28 times in the last 29 years. And that's what I'm hoping to share with you today are some of the things that, you know, I've learned along the way, including you know, one or two of the mistakes that I made along the way.
So one of the questions that gets asked a lot is, was there a pivotal moment where the company turned the corner, or was it just kind of plugging along. And
Yeah, I'd say it's the middle of that ladder. It's just, there were a lot of, just always we were sort of facing challenges, and it's kind of like really asking ourselves, what's the most important thing to be working on at this given moment in time, and then making sure you're focused on that and not a lot of the other stuff that's going on around you. But yeah, we never hit any home runs. Mostly just a bunch of singles and maybe a double here and there.
but it was the consistency that helped. And
Yeah, I think there was a lot of hard work, and not just on my part. I think that, I've had a lot of great people. I've surrounded myself with a lot of great people, and, I think anybody who wants to be successful, that's really a key to the whole thing, is you can't do it all yourselves. In fact, I remember in the late 90s reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was basically about why most companies don't grow beyond 40 to 50 employees. And the article was basically saying that there's one reason, and one reason alone, for this particular challenge. And so when I saw that article, we were actually at 45 employees. And so I was very interested in what it had to say. And I still remember that it said, it's all about delegation. So founders oftentimes really struggle when it comes to delegating, because they did everything themselves. First it was just like my parents. It was just my mom and my dad. I can remember when what today is the sales and marketing side of AGM, I can remember when it was all contained on a
card, what do you call it?
card table in my parents' bedroom. That's how it all began. And now we have over 100,000 square feet company. So, but as you can see from that previous chart, it happened slowly. And I'd say another thing about that chart is if you looked at it, I think every time we ever had a downturn in the stock price since I took over, the following year we hit an all-time new high with our stock price. And if I may say also, and I'll talk more about it later, but we're an ESOP, so our shares just get valued once a year. And related there too, I've had a couple times where an employee has basically said, Howard, who's giving you your performance review? And I don't know about for the rest of you, but I always just say, my performance review is that stock price. So, if it's going down, you feel free to harangue me about it. But again, I think we've had 4 down years in the past 24. And every other year, every time that's happened, it's more than recovered the following year.
So we're going to jump here. We're looking at Howard, a bus stop and a bus. What does this have to do with your job as CEO?
So, I would imagine all of you have developed a philosophy about running your company. At one point I was reading, and I'm not sure, it might have been Good to Great, but I was reading about a CEO who basically had broken down what he felt a CEO should be. And it's this bus analogy in that, as a CEO, your major job is to get the right people on the bus, to get the wrong people off the bus, to move the right people into the right seats, and then, of course, to get the bus moving in the right direction. And I would say that pretty well summarizes how I run AGM. I have a real focus on the people side of things and making sure that we have the right people. Related there too, because I don't know if it'll come up or not, but, you know, so how do you do that? How do you get the right people on the bus? And especially when I'm at a stage now where I don't even interview really virtually any of the incoming people. They just come on the bus. But then during that first, you know, probationary period, 30, 60, 90 days, I do take the time to get to know them. I get to know what other people think about them. But even before we get to that stage of hiring them, we do a lot of testing. Maybe even to the extent we've had a few applicants walk out the door because it was just too much.
I would like to say it was a lot of testing when I showed up for my first interview.
Right. And I think that's really important. I think it's important that you develop testing that kind of really reflects the position and what you care about. And don't be asking so much what other people do. Really be asking yourself. Go ahead, Stacy.
What kind of testing do you use? What do you do when you test?
Go ahead.
Well, on my day, when I thought I was actually going to an interview, I wound up
Repeat
taking...
the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, what kinds of testing do you do? And this has been a few years ago. I think we've changed it a little bit since then. But on my day when I first showed up, I thought I was actually going to be interviewing with people, and I wound up testing. I did the Wonderlic intelligence test. I did a grammar test. I did a math test. I did a writing test, and a typing test. So we ran through all that, and I remember walking out of the building going, that will be the end of that. They probably won't be calling me.
Let's see, I apologize. Hold on here.
So as part of that, though, Howard, with the testing that you've got going on with people, one of the things that you have kind of set as a priority for yourself is when it comes to hiring people, you mentioned the fact that the number one thing you're looking for is integrity. Talk a little bit about that. Why integrity? Why not necessarily understanding of the job, experience, other things that people traditionally look for?
I just happen to think that this is one of the things that really, you need from every employee. You need to be able to trust them. You need to be able to trust what they say. You need to be able to trust what you do. What they do when you send them out to see customers and fly them somewhere, or you send them to a conference. You need to know that you can count on them to do their best to, represent your organization. But even in the, even like when it comes to, say, production work that's performed by unskilled workers, I still just need, we have a lot of, basically, we're audited a lot by defense manufacturers in particular, and they need to be able to trust that we're following the processes that we say we're doing. And so it's just, it's a major thing. Have I ever discovered somebody lacking integrity and let them stay at the company? I have on multiple occasions. But I've also made it pretty clear to them, something like this can never happen again.
All right, and when it comes to that, we're talking about your role primarily today as AGM CEO, but you've also run an ice cream shop and been involved in other businesses along the way. And during that process, you've kind of developed a mentality and a philosophy about managing people. And one of those that you believe strongly in is documenting issues from an HR perspective. Share a little bit about that. Why do you find that so valuable? Why do you put so much time into that? What is the value that you find in that?
Well, I probably document to excess, but early on, I had an ice cream operation. I had a few ice cream stores here in Arizona, and I followed my father's advice, which was usually really good advice, but not in this case. And he was just like, and just do it. You know, my mother, who came from more on the HR side of the business, was like, you got to document. And I followed my dad's advice, and in this case, my mother's was right. And it landed me in front of the state attorney general's office, and I just felt a lot of pressure from, you know, like I felt like what they were hitting me with was unfair in terms of the claim that was being made. But it was like I had this monkey on my back for about 6 months that I just couldn't, you know, dislodge. And it was just like, I don't want that to ever happen again. Also, during the 90s, when my mother was running the business, we still, on multiple occasions, you know, had to go in front of judges, I think at least 3 times over that decade. Whereas during the last 25 years, I've never had to be in that experience again. And again, it's kind of like, when something like that happens, I don't know if any of you have had that happen, but I assume that that's happened, but, you know, it just eats up so much time. I remember one of these cases from the 90s where the new HR leader, she'd been there about 6 months, and I asked her how much she'd spent on this one specific claim. And she basically, you know, said half my time in the first 6 months has been focused on this. So, you know, that's why I do what I do. On the other hand, the HR attorney that I utilize here in town has also said to me that I'm sort of slow on the draw when it comes to getting rid of employees. And he has had to on multiple occasions. I mean, like, Howard, just do it, you know, like, don't be debating this in your head. So, and that's an example of, you know, maybe an area where I am somewhat flawed, is that I tend to overthink these HR situations. But like I said, on the other side, I've never had to go in front of a judge. So
we've talked about the bad part of HR, but let's talk about one of the better parts, which is the work that you put into building a company and a culture that engenders loyalty and helping people have an opportunity to grow. And, you know, your focus on employee retention. Share a little bit about some of the things that you put in place. I mean, AGM offers quarterly profit sharing. There's a bonus plan. You offer educational reimbursement. Employee recognition program, employee education, the ESOP. Why, I mean, these things are not cheap, they're not free. Why make that effort? Here, I'll take it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Apologize. It's only going to go away if I do this. Very good. Okay, there we go. All right. Even though it's off, it's going to do that. Let's see here. Well, let me just begin. Let me go ahead. Let me begin with pay. You know, when we were struggling those years, there were no pay increases, and frankly, you know, something if I had it to do over again. So for a long time, you know, with unskilled workers, I would basically bring them in at minimum wage. And it's only been in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years where I finally just said, you know, I'm going to start everybody at 10% over minimum wage. You know, nobody's going to make less than that. And just that little change, I think, has been really helpful. You know, for those kind of people, minimum wage coming in are probably maybe roughly a third of our workforce who are coming in at that level. And just that little increase, I think it's helped those people from the standpoint of, I mean, they know by and large that that's where the pay is going to be, but they're always, you know, in the past they were always looking to see where they could, you know, make a little more money going elsewhere. And, you know, that's something I just should have done much sooner. I'd like to even go higher, but we have competitors out there, and there's pressures, and I have a CFO who's probably going to, you know, like, expressed a lot of concern if I were to go that direction.
A lot of concern.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done, one of the things that we really that I think stands out for AGM is that we provide college tuition reimbursement. Thank you, Stacy. Probably all of you know that you can do this. I don't know how many of you are doing it. But at AGM, it's different because, we don't care how young or old you are, or what position you are in the company. I don't even care what you study. We just want to give people an opportunity to go back to school. This year, I just got our stats for the year 2024. 20% of our workforce took college coursework this year. So comparatively speaking, I became friends with Lee Lambert, the chancellor of Pima Community College, when he was in town. And he liked me because we were sending a lot of people to his college. But when we first got to know each other, he brought me into a boardroom with his top people, and at the time I got it up to maybe 10%, and I was saying, well, who else in town is, doing well at this? Because I'd like to learn from them in terms of how we get more people involved. Thank you. And he said with this, Ian Rourke was there, and several others that you might know, and he said, Howard, we don't know of any employer in town your size where even 5% of the workforce is in college. Since then, we've gone as high as 27% of the workforce. So that year, because I've given a few talks on this around the state and even outside the state, but that year, that reflected 34 employees. They took a total of 124 courses. It was 3.8 courses per participating employee. And the whole thing only cost me $50,000. Now, to be honest with you, I really would need to, I'm rolling also the ones that I put on FAFSA. And the reason I'm including the federal aided ones is because before I made such a point of people doing this, basically we had virtually nobody participating. And it's oftentimes it's us who's pointing out to the given employee, you qualify for FAFSA. So anyhow, it's just been rewarding. Among others, we've graduated a teacher, a social worker, a nurse. Through this program, these are people that's not really going to help our operation, but it's kind of cool to feel like we've given back to the community in this way, and that maybe if Paul here or somebody from his family or really any of you were to have a problem, we at least help get one nurse trained for Tucson Medical Center. Other things that we've focused on. We have a Bright Idea program that we basically give people both cash awards and plaques or trophies. Every quarter, we get employees' ideas, lots of them. I think right now we have maybe at any given time we've got about 60 different ideas in the system, and it's been able to help us chip away, especially at things that are keeping us from being efficient. And the way AGM is set up too, the employees really benefit from all this. So I guess once again I'm going to refrain from going into the ESOP quite yet, but we also have an Employee of the Year program. We give out about $50,000 a year as part of that. We recognize probably an average of maybe 15 individuals and another half dozen or so teams each year. We've just figured out different ways. So for the Employee of the Year stuff, it's kind of cool in that any given employee, there's probably at least three or four different ways that the employee could be recognized by our Employee of the Year program, no matter their status in the company. When I say that, I'm saying regardless of whether they're salary or hourly, for example. What else comes to mind, Paul?
Well, I think one of the things that AGM has done that I've never experienced at another company is once a year, I get a sheet where they list out all of the benefits, not just my salary and insurance, but all of the benefits. And it was through that process where I realized that I was leaving money on the table. It led me to go back to school to get my MBA at 52 years old, which after taking 28 years off of college, I do not suggest starting quite like that, but it was a great experience for me. And it was interesting because other companies that I had been with, in fact, even when I interviewed with Howard at one point, I remember him telling me, I believe strongly in education. And I have to tell you guys, I've worked for a number of CEOs, and I remember thinking, yeah, I've heard that before. I don't really believe it, but I've heard it. The company I worked for at the time was like, hey, you want to go to training? Well, okay, we're going to send you to one, but don't ask again for 3 years. You know, that kind of thing. AGM really does value investing in the employees. I think that helps with the loyalty and retention. And just the fact that you can study anything that you want, which I find just still mind-blowing from that perspective. We've talked about some of those benefits. However, let's turn our attention to the ESOP, because that has been a big issue and an important part of your success as CEO, I think you would say, in helping employees grow. So let's talk a little bit about that and what it is and how it works.
So I'm going to talk about that, but I want to go back to, what you said kind of made me think about a few things. Going back to this education thing, I offer that where they can study anything. But the fact of the matter, and maybe it has to do with the diversity of our company, there's just so many college courses that really apply in one way or another to our operation. And so, I don't even know if 5% of the workforce is really studying something that doesn't apply to AGM. The other part of it is, and we didn't talk about this, is we actually, one of the reasons we get participation, a high level of participation, is I don't believe that we as employers, when we provide college tuition fee for people, I don't believe that we should be waiting until they get the degree before we give them an increase in wage or salary. So all along the way, every time we conduct a performance review, whether hourly or salary, we look at all the coursework. We look at, we consider, is this the associate, bachelor's, master's, and now we even have somebody pursuing a doctorate level. And we look at the grade that they received, and we look at the number of credit hours, things like this. And I've developed a formula for how much all that is worth. So as they go through this coursework, they are continually getting rewarded. And I think that makes it gigantic. If you want to build something like what we've done at AGM, I think you really need to do that. I've also had a few CEOs over the years basically say to me the same question, which is like, well, Howard, if we educate them, what happens if they leave us? And I myself used to think that way. Like, how can I guarantee, you can't, how can I guarantee that they'll stay? But what I've said back to those CEOs in more recent years is Paul, for example, if you were CEO, Paul, you're not really asking yourself the right question. What you should really be asking yourself is this: if you don't educate them, what happens if they stay? Because that, by and large, is what's happening at most of our businesses. And it's why so many business owners are struggling to succeed, because they don't really have fully qualified individuals to work their business. This should all be part of it. And just so you know, there's something in the IRS code, it's called Section 127 of the IRS code, and the IRS will provide you, your business, with up to $5,250 per employee for you to educate them each year. And if you're not using it, you're missing out on a great way to grow your company. The other thing I'd like to say is that most of the employers who, most of the employees who go through this college education, they end up staying with me. You know, they stay with me longer, far longer than the ones who don't. So if anybody would like to talk with me any more on this, this is something I feel like I've developed a small level of expertise in, and I'd love to share with you more on this point.
Small level of expertise, but a high level of passion. So,
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
yeah. All right, so with the ESOP, share just a little bit about that.
Okay, so our transition into becoming an ESOP was due to the fact that in the late 80s, my parents were looking for an exit strategy for how to get out of the company. And as some of you may know, ESOPs can allow the owners, basically there's tax incentives if you end up selling your company to your employees through an ESOP. So I had just returned to the company when the ESOP got founded. And I was there for the very first talk. I think it was my second month back at the company of what it was all about. And suffice it to say, I remember going home to my late wife and telling her, like, well, I got to stay here now another, 6 years. I got to get through this vesting process and make sure that, I take all of this with us. And it wasn't a great deal of money, but it seemed like it at the time. Anyhow, my parents came to the conclusion, though, later on that, again, they started in 88. The first full year of the ESOP was 89. We went through these tough years in the mid-90s. And I can't remember how many times I heard my mother in particular exclaim, like, we should have never done the ESOP. The employees they're not acting like owners. So I'm sorry, ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. The employees aren't acting like owners, they're just acting like mere employees. And once again, I ended up, finally after industry years, I ended up doing some reading on this topic. And I basically came to understand, to realize that the reason that our employees weren't acting like owners was because we hadn't taught them how to think like owners. And so you have to do the teaching and getting them to think like it if you want them to act that way. So as a result, I just started to open up the books to the employees on the company and how it ran. Well, to be honest, both my parents, but particularly my mother, almost had an apoplectic fit when I decided to do this, And she's like, my dad present, you can't do this, you can't share, you should only be sharing this with your CFO, maybe with your board members, but certainly never with your rank and file employees. And I remember responding, I just said, well, I've done some reading on this topic, and this is what, I'm led to do, and I kept doing it. I remember that one of my longer-term employees, who was, he was not my biggest fan, but I remember hearing secondhand that he said, he was our production manager at the time, and I heard that he said, I've learned more about this company in the last year than I did in the previous 25. And that's when I knew I was on the right track. And, you really need to help your employee. If you want them to really help you, you need to help them. It's a symbiotic relationship.
Well, the ESOP allows when the company wins, the employees are winning. They're incented directly to make decisions on a daily basis in 1,000 little ways that you can never mandate to make it more profitable, more efficient, better decisions overall. And so from that standpoint, I do think it's been a win, and I think it has encouraged people to think like owners. I would also say that if you're thinking about that or pursue that, it's important that you really do teach the employees. I, again, was surprised when I came to AGM. Quarterly, we have a quarterly report about the company. Howard will spend at least an hour and a half, maybe sometimes 2 hours, walking through all the financials of everything, and also trying to help teach people who may not have that financial background to understand what it is that they're seeing, why it's important, why it impacts the business, and in the end, why it impacts them. So I think from that standpoint, it's been a strong incentive for us. And I think you would say that sharing financial data is probably one of the best decisions you've ever made as a CEO.
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at that chart, that growth of our company, since we've had the ESOP, it's really been since the late 90s, which is when I implemented that the company really began to take off. And while I'm at it, one of the mistakes that I made early on, before I believed in this thing, like I got to teach them think like owners, I had actually come to the belief, in part because my parents were like, the ESOP was a terrible idea. I was already having us begin to gradually pay the ESOP owners off when there were opportunities to do so. Instead of growing the ESOP, I was trying to shrink it. And, so like when I got involved, we were at 42% ownership. And I think it got down to about 29 before I really started asking myself, what the am I doing here? Like, the less ownership they have, the less reason they have to care. And so there's been a big focus on my part at trying to reverse it and go the other way. And I'm really hoping here in the next 2 years to hopefully get it back up to about 42% ownership that it was once at. And of course, when I exit the company someday, there's a good chance it'll become 100% owned by the employees.
So let's turn our attention here to something else. I don't know if any of you struggle with this, but certainly from a management standpoint, I think a lot of us do, is giving and receiving feedback when it's needed in the appropriate time. Howard, this is something that I think that you have done a good job with in terms of modeling, just so that you're aware of every employee at AGM that is on the hourly side of things gets 2 reviews a year, and they're not there's circled, 1 through 5 if they're doing good. It's a very thorough, thoughtful review process. As someone on the salary team might get a lengthy, dare say extensive review, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Coming up here soon, so
Yeah.
You guys put in a good word for me, it's about to happen. But I think part of that though is, what I have learned as part of that is the value of consistently giving people feedback on a regular basis and doing it in a way where you're addressing the issues honestly. So Howard, I think that's something that you do well. Share just a little bit about why that's important to the culture of the company and why it helps us continue to grow.
Well, again, as I said in the very beginning, it's all about that bus model, getting the right people on the bus, getting the wrong people off the bus. And I can't help in that process if I don't know what goes on. So you're probably going to find this somewhat bizarre or maybe amazing, but I actually get involved in every single review. I look over, I edit, and I also meet with every employee. So, I think that translates into north of 225 hourly reviews per year, and then 25 salary reviews per year. And, all of us as CEOs, we have to, pick how we spend our time. There's not a lot of things in the company that I'm really good at, but I think I'm pretty good at this. And giving that feedback, and also, kind of like when things aren't working out, to try to help those employees turn those situations around, or if not, to help them move on from the company. That said, I'm not terminating a lot of people. I think this year, I know I've terminated one employee, maybe two, but we have 135, so that's not a lot. We've also had, we still have challenges, with like people leaving us and stuff. I guess I haven't spoken at all about retention. Our retention level this year through the end of October, I have that number, is like we were at 13%. So for comparison's sake, feel free to fact check me on this, but a statistic I saw more recently was like, I think this is for 2023, the average US manufacturing company was experiencing 32.5% turnover, so we're well below that. And of course, consequently, we have a lot more employees who not only have a lot of years with us, but they're also just, because they've been there so long, they just know how to do a lot of different things. And when you're, like we are, a low volume, high mix manufacturer, it really helps to have people who've done these various jobs in the past. The other thing, in fact, that we probably forgot to mention about the ESOP, but I think it's pretty important, is that we are allowed through our pension, we have both an ESOP and we have a defined benefit pension plan, which for those of you who are not really aware of them, this is a pension plan where the employer puts in all the money. The employee doesn't have to put in anything. So I think we've got one of the best retirement plans for employees, not just in Tucson, but I think in the entire country. And we're allowed by law to put in 25% of payroll into our pension ESOP. So right now, by the way, our pension, and this is one of the very other few things that I do, I think, fairly well. We're 80% overfunded on that at the beginning as through the end of last year. And this year, we're probably going to be, I think it's probably going to end up over 100% overfunded. So the cool thing is that allows us to put lots of dollars into the ESOP. So we're allowed to contribute 25% of payroll by law. We are actually right now throwing in an average of 23 or 24%. So just to put that in perspective, let's suppose that you're making $100,000 a year. We're putting into your ESOP alone $23,000, $24,000 a year. So that every 4.25 years, it's like getting a whole nother year of salary or hourly wage compensation.
So, to bring it back a little bit here, one of the things that I would ask is, you have an employee who's struggling. It's a difficult conversation that you need to have. What are your best suggestions for dealing with that and doing it in a way where it can be constructive and everybody can grow and move forward together?
Well, of my many faults, one is probably not always exhibiting the patience that I should, and not always being as respectful with others as I should. So I really kind of trained myself through making those mistakes and seeing those conversations go sideways or basically not well. It's trained me to work towards always trying to handle these difficult situations in a respectful manner where that other person feels respected, and where you're really trying to work towards a solution as opposed to just, these are all your faults or something like that. I see in the note up there, help the employee to change or move on, and I think it's all about that. It's like, ideally you want to help the employee change if they're interested in doing so, and you need to be direct, but I don't think you ever need to be unkind. And then if it's not working out, to kind of just maybe it's just best for us to move on. And Paul, you saw a situation about 1.5 years ago where we were sitting with one of your employees together, and And ultimately, the employee, got upset, and which is what I told you that was probably going to happen. Go ahead, you want to tell the story?
Well, I mean, we did have a difficult situation come up. I'm sure everybody has been in that role. You have that sinking feeling in your stomach that you know you have to have that conversation. We had that conversation, and she got very upset. But the thing that impressed me in terms of watching Howard interact with that was he just didn't let it face him. In fact, at one point, the comment was made, well, I'm just going to resign. And he said, and I was kind of, because of the situation, there was a part of me inside that was like saying, okay, that's a great idea. Instead, Howard said, you could do that if you want to, but maybe you want to take a few minutes and let's talk through this and see if there's a better solution for you and for the company. And it was just delivered in such a unemotional, direct way, kind of diffuse the situation, allowed us to go ahead and have a conversation, get through that in a professional way. And I thought that speaks to your credibility as a leader and your willingness to care for the employee even when they're having a hard time, trying to find the best solution for everybody involved.
And I also, thank you, Paul. I also feel like, like it says here, firing is not the worst thing. And sometimes just like, I try and look at it as maybe I'm helping that employee move on to that next thing in their life that they're really meant to do. Because obviously they're exhibiting a manner or attitude or whatever it's just not going to work here at HEM. And I'll tell you, I had a tough experience with a few employees about 8 or 10 years ago, and one even made a claim against us, which she later withdrew. But I was walking around Reed Park, and all of a sudden this truck stops. And two people, this is on the road that goes through by the zoo area. And both of these individuals come out and they throw their arms around me. And it was a couple that had been at HEM, and they left, her in particular, through this. But, we ended up having a really positive experience. And they even asked me to come to their wedding and to get people out on the dance floor and things like that. So, that's my preference, is to leave things, that way in a positive manner.
Stacy, I want to be careful with time here. How are we doing on time?
Do you want to do some Q&A?
Yeah.
So it's 1:35 and the next session starts at 2?
Okay, so we have a couple minutes. Let's take a couple questions from the crowd. Is there something specific you'd like to?
Are you at the end of this?
No, we've got more to go.
Why don't we go with 10 minutes of this, and then we'll open it to the crowd?
Is that okay for you? Okay. All right.
10 and 10, something like that.
Okay, so Howard, from your perspective, what's your biggest mistake that you feel like you've made as a CEO? We talked about this a little bit, a couple things that you've mentioned in the past were potentially, and you touched on this already a little bit, underpaying people early on, but also making a risky decision in terms of acquiring a company where maybe it wasn't fully clear about the product.
About 5 years ago, we purchased a company on Miranda, and we were hopeful that it would work out. It happened right before COVID, and this company, we really needed to do international sales. We needed to have people flying on planes and going to other countries, and suffice it to say that we couldn't get anybody on flights anywhere. I mean, we just, and we often had a hard time getting these people into the office. About a year, about a year and a quarter went by, and this thing had basically generated a lot of losses. And even though I think that we were leading them in a positive direction, that could ultimately pay off. My board we sat around a table one day, and I asked each one of my board members what they thought, and basically we collectively came to the decision that despite this fact that we'd sunk $4.5 million into this in terms of the after-tax loss, that we just, needed to move on. And we ended up picking up, though, one of my board members suggested we pick up the intellectual property. And by chance, just a few weeks ago, we got $1 million for that. So now we're at maybe a $3.5 million loss. But the point is that sometimes I think you just need to move on and not let it sink you. Like we were losing about, I think it was like $250,000 a month on this thing. And it looked to me like it was going to be a couple of years before we'd be able to turn it around. And even that was not for sure. And so we've, been able to lick our wounds and go off in a different direction, and we're much stronger. I mean, you saw from the stock price chart over there, we're actually, a much stronger company than we were 4 years ago. So it seems to have been a good decision.
Yeah, I think the goal is to move quickly and to forget the mistake, but remember the lesson as far as applying it for future decisions.
Yeah, actually, so I've got lots of mistakes that I've made over time. It's amazing that we've done as well as we have. One of which was, at one point, it was time for us to sort of like jettison the existing computer system and to go on a new one. And we got involved with one called Intuitive, which ended up being sort of like anything but. So after this had gone on for, at first, we almost killed the company in the first month of trying to launch it. About a year and a quarter later, I asked my, head of engineering, who's also one of my brightest guys, who also told me, don't do it. Whereas most people in the company were saying that we were ready, and it was like, we're not ready. And he basically, at that time, he said, Howard, we're still not ready, and we never will be. It's just not the right. And the cool thing is, so about 15 years ago, I started here in Tucson, a CEO with the help of the Arizona Tech Council. I started a CEO network for other defense manufacturers and businesses that are involved in the defense world. And I was actually able to call them after I came to the realization it's never going to work. And I basically called all of them together, 15 CEOs in there, other defense companies, and I basically asked all of them, well, what are you guys using? What's working for you? And what was amazing to me to find out at that time was they basically, to a CEO said that the software that they were on was not good for their company. Every single defense company that here in town I spoke with was unhappy with their software. And one of those companies, the owner basically said they'd cobbled together 6 different software systems, but they still weren't happy. So so being able to bounce ideas like that off of others in the community, and I suggest to all of you that you find your own, network of people to be involved with. But it made me all of a sudden realize, okay, I'm going to have to do something. I'm going to have to handle this problem a different way. By the way, this was a $1 million mistake, and not my only $1 million mistake. But that led me to realize, I need to be able to look at a bunch of these different softwares simultaneously. And ultimately, we did that through something called a ERP shootout that was out in San Diego. So I sent my team over there. They looked at over 2 days at 8 different pieces of software, and they ultimately got involved with one called Epicor, which has just been wonderful for us. But there was a situation of, you have to learn from your mistakes. By the way, the way that I first had done it was, just my IT people, they should be able to guide me to this, and that was the wrong way to do it. I basically needed to take the heads of different parts of my company and find out what was important to each of them, and have them help collectively make this decision. And then, by the way, over the next 2 years, they all got involved in how do we customize this, and it was important for us to find a software that we could customize for our needs, whereas The other company was like, well, you have to change your system so you can do it this way. And that's not the way to go.
All right. So, do we have time for one more? Yeah. Okay. All right. So Howard, just kind of to this one here. What's your biggest personal weakness? And I think back to the story that you shared with me about an employee who came and said, well, you know, Howard is.
Yeah.
I'll let you take it from there.
So, yeah, this employee didn't come to me. I just heard about this, you know, and so I'm sure, you know, maybe this happens at your place. Maybe not everybody's totally enamored with your leadership. But I heard secondhand that one of my employees, and this employee is still with me, by the way, and he basically was talking to a group of employees, and he said, you know, it's not that Howard is all that bright. He just tends to hire people who are brighter than he is. And, you know, you might think I would be insulted by that, but I mean, what am I supposed to do? Hire people who are stupider than I am? And I think you yourselves, you know, like all of us, I mean, I agree, I'm no rocket scientist, but, you know, when I'm hiring people, I do want them to be the best at what they do in various ways. And I don't necessarily mean just like technically, you know, part of it is it's the people skills too. And you can see, I mean, Paul's got that in spades. But anyhow, I take no offense. I really am not the brightest person in my organization. And I take great pride in hiring people who are smarter than I am. And I think it's had a lot to do with this phenomenal success that we've had.
All right, so given the time, we've got a couple more minutes. If any of you have any questions that you would like to ask Howard, please feel free to do so. Yes, and we've got a microphone that I'll pull that off the podium and we can have somebody help bring this to people who may have questions. Is that mic on? Just check and make sure it's on. Yep.
So my first question is he going to get a raise at his annual?
He is.
Okay, good.
We've had a great year. We're up 15% this year, so probably everybody's going to be getting a raise.
Who's got questions? Just anything.
Over here.
Here we go.
I knew you would.
Hi, Howard. My name is Jordan Benjamin of Direct Services. Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I have a question for you, and you may not know the answer. We investigated ESOPs. Is it terribly difficult to implement? I've heard that it's very expensive. Not once you get it going, but the initial implementation is very difficult and expensive.
I've heard that there's some expense. To be honest with you, like I came in after that expense had been made. My understanding is it doesn't probably really make sense until you have about 50 employees. But here's what I would say is that the average ESOP compared to the average business, the average ESOP outperforms by 2 percentage points per year the average business. And, you know, of course, like I said, it's only going to, you know, kind of indicated earlier, you're probably only going to achieve that extra 2% if you do this thing about teaching your employees how to think like owners. And, you know, I would say that's really, I think if I had just been handed the company the way my parents had it, and I didn't have the ESOP, and I hadn't done what I did, I think that that chart that you saw would have flatlined, and we might be today at, at most 75 employees or something like that. So I definitely think it's worthwhile. I'm a big advocate for ESOPs, and part of it, I just think it's a wonderful thing to do for your workforce in terms of giving them an opportunity to become owners. And I'd say one of the most exciting times in an employee's life at AGM is after they've hit about 2.5 to 3 years. It's when they get inducted into our ESOP. And it's just amazing the pride that most of them feel. And by the way, the induction is something I just kind of came up with, and I thought people would think it was kind of hokey. But and nobody's ever given me any crap about getting inducted. They feel very proud, and almost all of them have never worked for an ESOP before. I'd say like 98% of them. So if you're up to about that 50 employees or so, 40, 50 employees, something in there or more, I'd go for it.
Howard, I have a question. I'm Lily
Yes.
Darling, CEO of IncuWave, digital marketing agency.
Nice to meet you.
I am curious if your semantics might be different than mine, because you talked about your incremental growth, yet you also talked about doubling up to 28 times in 29 years. So we saw quite a trajectory of growth, but you explained it as being very incremental, that you only hit singles and doubles. How would you reconcile that with innovation? Obviously, you've expanded to different types of work. You've engineered new products. So how does that go together in terms of incrementally, but you're also taking some pretty significant risks, it looks like?
I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes I feel like in my company, it's almost like there's walls. Like, this is who we are. And I think sometimes it's almost like the walls in this room where you have to push against it and see if it moves. And obviously the ones on that end and this end, they're not going to move much, but a little experimentation. And you just find those different ways to, find out how you succeed, and you celebrate those successes. Going back to the Bright Idea program, we probably, recognize, an average of, 25, 30, 35 ideas per year. And again, it's like when we make, this only saves us 100 or 250 or a few thousand or whatever it is. But it starts, if it becomes all of a sudden part of your company, and you start saving that, over and over again. Or it's like the education thing, at your companies, I would guess that most of them, I'm guessing that most of you do not have employees who are in college that you're paying for, so you're going to start, and you're not going to start at 27%. When I got going, one of the reasons I got interested in this was because I realized I couldn't run my business if I had not gotten a college education. Now that's not entirely true. Maybe I'll say this, I couldn't run it as well. And so, it's kind of like, and I'm also interested in changing people's lives, but I've got to talk them into that, and then they've got to take that step, and then it's one by one, and then I've got to be able to keep them and retain them, and it's like I said, it hasn't been like all of a sudden we discovered the Apple computer or something like that, and things just took off. It's been slow, and it's been persistence, and there have been mistakes along the way, and every now and then I've had in my investments I've been able to make $2 million off my investment decisions in the stock market for the last couple of years. So that's been very helpful to our company too. But I don't always. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, I invested in a local startup, and I lost $1 million on that transaction. So, a lot of times it feels like almost like you're climbing a mountain. It's like 2 steps forward, then you're on that shale near the top, and it's like you slip back a foot here and there. So it's been a combination of successes and mistakes from which I learn.
I would say too, just to add to that, one thing that AGM does very, very well is we try very hard to have metrics to measure everything. And we're constantly looking at that. And I'm always surprised at the number of statistics that we actually have internally for different things. And one thing that has impressed me about the management is they're not afraid to take a risk, but if the metrics are not panning out and it shows that it's not going forward, they're also not afraid to pull the plug, not put good money into bad money, and make a decision to go another direction.
I'm glad that he brought up the metrics because every single member of our salary team has got objectives. And again, when I hold these quarterly meetings or when I hold our annual state of the company, my annual state of the company address, you know, I'm able to take these metrics and I can show them going back years and years, some going back decades, where we're at and what we've been able to achieve. And it's kind of like that. If you don't know where you're at, you can't know where you're going. And okay, 5.
We have 5 minutes.
Right.
I have one question that we can close this on.
Sure.
Because there might be people here left that are too afraid to ask this question, so I'm
Okay.
going to ask it for them. So maybe there's people in the room that want to work for AGM Container Controls. Like, yeah, I'm not as happy with XYZ company, and maybe I want to work for you, Howard. So can you route that up and talk to some of those people that says, wow, I really want to work for you?
You know, Paul's a great example of this. Paul, we contacted you, how many years before you actually became our employee?
I was helping with some CRM consulting a couple years before that actually moved to a different kind of conversation.
Okay, but anyhow, we were aware of Paul, we were interested in Paul, and we have a great interest, our HR department has a great interest in sort of like getting people in the queue who might be interested just in case something opens up, because if you wait until those things open up, then it's like, well, who would be in? Then you're just doing what everybody else is doing. But yeah, make us aware of yourself and what you could bring to the picture. We have a sales guy that I had lunch with, I think it was pre-COVID. And he joined us, or I think I had lunch with him at least 6 years ago. And he's helping us with our Ascension wheelchair. I was very impressed. And I had other people in the queue, and about a year and a half ago, he joined our team and he helped us this year get to our biggest sales for our wheelchair lifts in the 30+ years that we've been doing this. So feel free, reach out to me if you ever want a tour. I'd be happy. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this today too, is, yes, I'm hoping there's something in it for you, but likewise, it maybe it's not a company you're interested in working for. Maybe you're doing, you own your own company or whatnot, but maybe you have, a family member or a friend where you can make suggestions like, hey, have you checked out AGM? Look at our website, look at what we're doing. By the way, because I don't think Paul said this, we were named America's best small business by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We got that honor back in 2009, so it can't be that bad a place to work. We beat out 4,500 other contenders, most of which were put forward by their own chambers of commerce.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you. And from you are amazing keynote speakers.
Thank you so much. It's really been an honor and pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you.
All right.